I enlisted because when the draft after Pearl Harbor was lowered from 20 to 18, the services realized they needed somewhere to keep a reserve of future officer candidates if it kept taking all the young men coming out of high school at 18. So they had programs in which you could enlist and they would let you stay in college as long as they could. So I enlisted in the Naval Reserve and was called, 18 months later, was called active duty. And I continued in the Navy one semester, my 7th semester in college, while in the Navy, before I was sent on to midshipman school to learn my specialty, that I was to be an officer. I was in Richmond, Virginia living, but I was at the University of Notre Dame when I enlisted in the Navy, and that's where they sent me back. Then active duty, I left with Notre Dame and went to the Naval Training Station in Newport for 6 weeks, and then to midshipman school at Wellesley College for girls. Well, I had a brother that was in the Air Force, and I didn't want anything of that, and I couldn't stand being outdoors in winters, and I thought of the troops in the trenches in Europe in the wintertime. I said, well, where I can stand that. So I thought the Navy, well, you'd always have a warm bed and a clean bed until they sunk it, you were in great shape. And I couldn't swim very well, but I didn't look that far forward. So I figured it would be a lot better living conditions than in the Army or the Marines, where I wanted no part of the Marines. Well, I'd gone to a military high school, so doing both about face or left face or had a drill, that was not a part. I guess really under the program where I was still in college, the first day of being in the service, I thought it was pretty good. I was going to get paid $50 a month to do what I was doing for nothing before. So I thought, and really I don't, that day, other than the fact they didn't have any shoes and I had black and white shoes on with my sailor suit, I really don't remember anything special about it other than you in uniform and somebody was telling you what to do a little bit more than before. I was an apprentice seaman, the lowest grade you can be. And in fact, when we were sent after that first semester in the Navy, I was sent, Wellesley was not ready for us yet. So I was sent to the commissary department at the Newport, Rhode Island training station. And we had captain's inspection, and the captain came around and looked at me with one stripe and said, what are you doing? You're apprentice seaman. You're supposed to be over there with the recruits. And I was trying to explain to him and obviously he didn't know anything about the V-12 program or anything else. So anyway, somebody said, well, he's part of the temporary part of the crew. He's finished training station. But so I was very happy to get out of the sailor suit and get into a midshipman uniform, which is essentially the same as an officer's uniform. In fact, a midshipman is an officer in a qualified sense. Well, that's a term the Navy uses. Well, qualified sense meant you get a whole lot less money and you don't have many privileges. But so the day you're commissioned, I remember that very well. That was a big event for me. We were at Wellesley, and my future wife came up with my mother to see me get my commissioning papers and to put the gold thing on my cap. And it was a big event. We had a big dance at the downtown Boston, and and I knew by that time what my orders were, that I was going to be on a brand new destroyer being built in New York, Staten Island. So it was a very big a day for me. And it was April the 19th, 1943. I remember the date and I always will. because I'm 91 years old, so I don't have many more years to worry about it. But, and I felt real good, and about 20 of my classmates were sent to New York with me, putting ships. They were building ships everywhere. And so we saw each other a lot in New York between the time we reported and that ships were commissioned and we sailed off. The training was really mostly book training. I mean, we had to learn what officers were supposed to do and not do in conduct and whatnot. But most of what my training was had to learn all the Navy pay records and how you paid people and keep records and how you requisition supplies and learn about how you feed them and what you're not supposed to do and what the temperature of the refrigerator is supposed to be and things like that. So it wasn't like field training for the Marines or the Army. The real training came once I got on the ship. Had to shoot 40 millimeter guns and how you trained and you detected how you detected the plane you were shooting at the target or whatever it was and what you were supposed to do and how far out you could open fire with a 40 millimeter gun and a 20 millimeter gun, and when you could shoot over the big, we couldn't shoot over the other big ships in the task force, but they could shoot over us, so we had to wear helmets because flak was coming down on us. But the destroyers were in the outer ring of a task group. I remember my supply instructor had been the supply officer for a Navy submarine force that was headquartered in Bermuda. And he talked so much about Bermuda and married a Trimmingham. If you've ever been to Bermuda, the Trimmingham was a big department store. So when it came time for us to request where we wanted duty, I think the entire class requested Bermuda, but none of us got it. So, and I remember one of the other ones that I didn't think too much of too, but I do remember the captains of my ship who I admired greatly, the two of them we had. So, one of them became an admiral later on, and I bumped into him up in Washington at a big Navy celebration. And strangely, even though I was only served about 3 months under him, he remembered me. So I don't know whether I was that bad or that good, but the war was over by that time. So, but I do remember the other officers on the ship, and I did make contact with at midshipman school, and he was supply officer of a destroyer in the same squadron. We've nested together often, and to this day I'm still in contact with him, and that was Melvin Laird, who became Secretary of Defense under President Nixon, and is still was head of the Red Cross, and still, I don't know, his dress is at the Red Cross, so I don't know what he's done because he's as old as I am. But we became very close and saw each other many times when he was in Washington and I was back in Richmond, Virginia. So the daily routine, we were with the big carrier task force, which was made up of maybe 25 destroyers, and each task group was made up of 25 destroyers spread around the outer circle, mainly for picking up pilots or whatever, or screening for submarines. Inside was maybe 4 cruisers and 2 battleships, and inside that was 3 carriers. So when we were at sea, which was most of the time, we were flying planes off every day. We were bombing someplace or another. Every 4th or 5th day, we would meet up what we call the supply group, which would be a small group of ships with tankers where we could replenish fuel. We could go along the carriers and pick up pilots and take them over to the small carrier to fly placement planes off. It was a busy day, or we could get belly tanks, because every time a plane took off from a carrier, they used a supplemental belly tank full of gas so they would have more gas once they got up to go to their target and back. So that was a very busy day. The other time I stood 8 hours a watch for every day in a coding room, breaking coded messages. We had to go to general quarters every morning before sunset. After that, every time we sent planes off, we went to general quarters. And of course, every time the radar showed enemy planes approaching us, so we were very busy. We got sleep when we could. We had two interesting things. We were in two typhoons. The first one was in December of '44, and Admiral Halsey was determined we were going to be ready to strike the Philippines the next day to help with invasion of Mindoro. But the storm got so bad we had to break off fueling, and we were very, and a destroyer in those days, they burned bunker fuel oil, which was the residue when everything else has been come out of the breaking it down for gasoline and what. Very thick, but and you had to heat it in order to pump it to make it liquid. So but you took on, as you used that oil up, we took on water we call ballast to keep the ship low in the water. Well, because we go fuel, it took 4 hours to pump that water out. We were riding empty. Fortunately, our chief engineer begged the captain to let us take on ballast because the ship next to us turned over and with terrible loss of life. So that was in December. Then we had another one in June, which really beat us up. In fact, it knocked a hole. I was getting down on my knees. Water had come through the ventilating system and got us soaking wet, and bam, boom, I looked outside the stateroom entranceway, and there was a hole in the ship, and every time we rolled, water poured in. So that was a day I'll never forget because I was scared to death. The ship had stopped dead in the water. The cruiser Pittsburgh had a bow knocked off of her. And so fortunately, my roommate was a very old Navy warrant officer. And I said, let's get out, go through, and we were all bashed in. We could not get out of our stateroom. It was covered. So, and the ship was stopped dead in the water, and I didn't know what was happening. And fortunately for him, I don't know whether I would have done it or not, but I said, let's go through that hole. I don't want to die like a rat. He said, you stay right here. So they did come and cut us free, and I went running up the midship passageway where my office was, and I was sitting there with the shower slippers on and my undershorts, and I heard the captain say, "Paymaster, report to the bridge." I told my lord, so I borrowed a pair of dungarees. That's where the laundry was. Got a dirty pair of dungarees and put them on. Went up to the bridge, and he said, "Now what are you going to do about feeding the crew?" And I'm thinking to myself, everybody on this ship is scared to death. He's the only man I know that's worried about eating right now. I told him, "Well, Captain, I'm sure we're going to get a sandwich together. We'll get something together." But fortunately, after that, the storm subsided, but it did beat us up pretty bad. So, well, I got off watch at 4 a.m., and that's when it was at its height. And it lasted till about noon, about noon the next day. We had 2 depth charges rolling around loose on it, that was what you threw over the back for submarines. They were going loose on the back fantail of the ship. So we sent a sailor over to get him overboard, and he broke a leg, and so. But it lasted back to about noon, 3 o'clock the next afternoon. So the whole day, and then we had to get over the storm. So I have a great deal of respect for the water. When they say the waves are too high here, I listen to them because I've seen the damage that water can do under the right. We recorded a 68-degree roll. We were supposed to turn over at 50, but fortunately we righted ourselves. So, and it was Admiral Halsey was court-martial for both decisions. With a typhoon or hurricane, you're supposed to go with it or against it. You don't go sideways. But because he was determined to bomb, the second one was we were off Okinawa. But I think he was very important because he claimed it wasn't a hurricane. I don't know where he was. He was 15 miles from us, I guess, but it was sure a hurricane typhoon where we were. So, that was the two scariest things I had. Plus one other incident. On the 23rd of July, 1945, 3 weeks before before the Japs surrendered, Air 9 destroyers were ordered for a shipping strike into Tokyo, outer Tokyo Bay. Now I don't think there was any military reason for that strike. I think it may have been psychological. We're trying to tell the Japanese that they better quit if we could. So 9 destroyers, we made a high-speed run into the outer Tokyo Bay at midnight. We did find 3 small freighters creeping in up the banks across away from us with radar. We could pick them up. And fortunately, it was a column of 9 destroyers. They turned, and I was where death then. We were the 5th one in line. I said, we hit a minefield. I hope by the time the 5 ships ahead of us, we would get enough sense to turn. And later we found we were very close to a minefield. But we did sink the 3 ships, and then we executed what says that well-known maneuver. We got the hell out of there. But we were 21 miles from Tokyo. And Japanese didn't like for United States Navy ships to get that close to the capital city. But we got it, fortunately, without any gunfire or bombs from the Japanese. But that was a very scary thing. And I did plenty of praying that night, I can tell you. But that was the most interesting thing. And we was written up, Time magazine reporter described it as a Germans coming into New York Harbor and going around Staten Island. But it wasn't quite that same, but we were in a big expanse of water, but very close to land. By today's standards, we wouldn't have thought it was so good, but I was amazed that it had good before. One of my storekeepers who had been with me in New York first called me aside and said, Mr. Stumpf, the food has gotten pretty bad. Well, I still had a chief commissary steward. Now, he was supposed to be handling that. So I called the steward in and I said, I didn't tell him, I said, I'm getting complaints about the food. And I said, first of all, I don't like your menu. It's for a week's menu that I had approved. Boiled potatoes, OJ. Well, I didn't know what, or WJ. I said, first of all, what the hell is a boiled potato WJ? He said, with jacket. I said, you mean not peeled? He said, yeah. But so, and he did straighten up, but after that, he got transferred off, and my first class storekeepers, the top rating, did well. We would buy tons of, we would order what we, fresh frozen. I mean, you couldn't order individual stuff very much out there. But the fresh frozen was a unit, and it was 5 tons. So that included 3 kinds of boxed beef, steaks and roast, stew beef, and hamburger, and chicken and hams, and all, but it was all prepackaged. We had nothing to do. Now, I don't know who made that up, but butter was rationed in the States to the civilian. We had so much butter, I didn't know what to do with it. We put open pounds of butter on the table. But the food from that point, whoever selected it and what went in the same way, we could not order so many cans of tomatoes or whatever. But the stuff they could send us pretty much of what I call staple. And the crew did a good job, and of course, you didn't have anything else to do. The food tasted pretty damn good. Now, the officers, of course, had their own mess, but they bought food from the general mess. They had to pay me government money, and we built them. And I told the storekeeper, I don't want any thing going to the officers' mess that isn't paid for. So don't say we don't need to pay them for this. I said, I don't want the crew to suffer in any way. I don't think after that, other than when we didn't have any meat for a month, we ate all the hot dogs, and we somehow or another gotten an overshipment of canned turkey. So we had canned turkey everywhere you could have it, upside down for a while. And then we got into Tokyo. I was able to, old Battleship Texas gave us some hot dogs. And then we bummed some more before the refrigeration ship got there, and we loaded up. Rough weather was interesting. I told my children that we had stanchions we put our arms around, and you'd be eating on your plate, and the thing would roll in your plate next door, so you'd eat on his plate, then it would roll, come back. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was damn near. You had a glass sitting there, you better hold it the whole time in rough weather. But I thought the food, and I think the crew thought the food was fairly good considered. But again, this is the end of the war. In the early part of the war, they didn't have all this expansive supply system. I never had time to entertain myself. I was either trying to get sleep or work. You talk about we're gonna play this kind of game and whatnot, and it's checkers and all these other. I never did, and nobody else did. I mean, you stand 8 hours watch, and plus you went to general quarters, and if it wasn't on your watch, that was interrupted. If we did that 5 times a day, time was very important. Unless when we got in port, we were busy. But you still had, in the evenings, we'd show movies on the ship, only when we were in port. And then they would, seem like in Ulysse, it rained every night at 8 o'clock. So we'd have to go inside till the shower was over and come back out and finish the movies. So then you swap movies with other ships. So that was the only entertainment we did when we were in port. Well, it's very short, and I have trouble reading it today, but it was basically what we did that day in company with what, and anything about when I would mention one ship was badly damaged, and the supply officer was a classmate of mine at midshipman school, or something like that, a ship that I knew somebody was on. But mainly said what we did each day, struck where, how many planes we shot down, how many planes we lost, and that type of information. After we left shipping commission, we went to Bermuda for what we call shakedown. And that's when they told me what my battle station would be, and said, you got to learn to shoot these guns. I said, wait a minute, I sit at a desk and write paper. But they didn't pay much attention to them. So we came back and shakedown. We stayed on the East Coast, working out problems with going from Norfolk to Boston. Finally, they said, told three of the ships, that prepare to make 30 knots for 72 hours. And everyone said, what in the world could make 72 knots for 72 hours? The average, we cruised at 15 knots. It took 2 boilers for that, but as soon as you speed it up, you had to put all 4 boilers on it now. So I was joking. I said, well, we're going to take Churchill home from the Quebec conference where he had met with Roosevelt. All was in the paper, no. Sure enough, one morning we pulled out of the fog, and there stands the Queen Mary right ahead of us. So we escorted the Queen Mary and Winston Churchill halfway to Europe and picked up the British escort. So he sent us message that thank you for the very efficient escort. After that, we met in WWII, joined up with a brand new battleship, Wisconsin. And I knew what was in. Changed the address from Fleet Post Office, New York, to Fleet Post Office, San Francisco. So we knew that we were headed for the Pacific. So we went through the Panama Canal into Pearl Harbor, and then picked up the Yorktown, entered battleship Wisconsin, the carrier Yorktown, and we headed to a place called Ulithi. Ulithi Atoll, there was no buildings. It was a very deep water, nice big bay with little islands all around it. And everything was on a ship. There were what we called destroyer tenders where we would go alongside and tie up and get our supplies and food and whatnot. They had tankers there, they had all kind of ammunition ship. Everything was on a ship. Our only trip ashore was destroyer men went about 5 miles up to a small island with nothing but palm trees and a beach, and we had frozen, that time beer came in steel cans. So we had frozen, I as a supply officer had frozen 2 cans of beer for each person. And by the time we got to that island, it was ice cold, and I've never seen 2 beers do so much damage to a bunch of sailors in my life. But I guess when you had anything to drink and you were ready to get drunk, so wonder some of them didn't drown. Then some of them would try to climb up a coconut tree and whatnot. But that was the only land we saw for 6 months. No, we never saw any people other than sailors for 6 months. We went in and out of Ulithi after every trip out until June. After the typhoon, we went into Leyte Gulf, and that was the first time we saw a human being, much less a female, was when we went into Leyte Gulf and got ashore. In fact, I found out a friend of my sister's was a Navy post, back he came out to the ship, and then I later got ashore on Leyte. But outside of that, we hadn't touched any land but that little deep. And then we sailed from that in June, headed up to Japan after, and they looked like the Japanese were quit, so we stayed out 3 months. We ran out of meat, because we were supposed to stay out 30 days. And I'll tell you a little instance about that that's a little funny, but we stayed, and finally the war ended. I was in CIC, and I heard them say, all chickens return to base. Chickens were airplanes. All chickens return to base. We were bombing Tokyo. Do not drop bombs. That was important work. So we knew the war was over. We shot down 24 kamikazes over the task force that day because some of them didn't get the word, apparently. So that was a very interesting day, too. Talking about the food, when we were in Leyte, we took on our how many bags of flour, and it was weevils in them. And the doctor said, well, you can't serve that. You got to survey them and throw them over the side. I said, okay, Doc. So we threw them over the side. We got some more flour, and there were weevils in that. So he said, well, you will just have to sift the weevils out. Well, you can see 2 bakers getting ready to cook 300 loaves of bread at night, trying to sift these weevils out. Finally, I told the doc, I said, Doc, we're going to tell them it's rye bread. And that was the only meat we had with those weevils. And we ate. But nobody knew it. They were all cooked, you know, in the bread or what. But he and I were the only 2, and the bakers were the only 2 knew it wasn't rye bread. But that was a funny incident that happened. Well, I was responsible for all the record keeping, for seeing the requisition supplies. I all the payroll records. When a crew, somebody was transferred off the ship, I mean, we paid. I was a pay officer. Of course, the captain wouldn't let them draw but $10 because there wasn't anything he'd do but shoot crap. There was no place to spend it other than the little ship store we had. Well, $2 would have taken that. And I was in charge of all the food, and commissary, and the meals the crew had. We had a 65 cents a day allowance to feed the crew, and I thought that about 10 cents of that, we had 23 coffee stations on the ship, 23, so I felt that 10 cents of that 65 went for coffee. We drank coffee. Captain insisted the mess all have coffee 24 hours. Well, you're getting up on watch. You see, we kept a third of our guns manned at all times. A third of the crew were in the main, one of those twin turrets, and third of the crew were anti-aircraft gun. Third of the crew were doing the engine room everywhere. So we were a third, because the kamikazes came out of the sky, you didn't have time to go to general quarters. So we were, so that was where most of the watch was, these people. So they were up all night. You had a 12 to 4 watch all this week. And then next week you had the 4 to 8. Next week you had the 12 to 4. And they changed once a week. One interesting thing, in the Navy, when you crossed a time zone, if you gained an hour, that had to be during working hours. But if you lost an hour, that came at night when you were supposed to be sleeping. So we were going up to Tokyo, going back across the international date line. So pretty soon, Captain said, well, these people aren't doing anything but working and not getting any sleep. I do remember when the Franklin was badly hurt, bombed off Okinawa, and they were not in that test group, but to win the next one, we could see the smoke and all. And that was a very high expense because the Japs knew they'd hit it, and they were determined they were going to keep coming back, and of course the smoke was going. They were putting a fire out. Very famous, many books have been written about that. So Admiral Spruance, I think, was in charge, and he said, we're going to get the ship, we're going to get you out of here. Well, we didn't get much sleep. We were general quarters almost all the time. We stood, instead of 8-hour watches, we stood 4-hour watches, and 4 off, and 4. And that was, I'm sure I didn't get 10 hours sleep in 3 nights. But fortunately, we got it far enough away that they couldn't get to it. And she got back into New York to be repaired about 2 days after the surrender. So, I mean, that was a very memorable occasion, too. We had what we call a CAP, Combat Air Patrol. We kept planes above us. Now, and they were protected, and most of the planes we shot down were shot down by a Combat Air Patrol. We shot 2. We got credit for shooting 2, my destroyer. But so we had, most of the time you picked them up on radar. We knew where they were, how far away, what direction were coming. You were alerted. Once in a while, one came in low over the water or and got close enough that then you were worried about it. In fact, the first Japanese plane I saw, I didn't even had a recognition, but I was supposed to be telling when we were supposed to shooting at a plane. The first one I recognized the pilot as being Japanese. That's how close he came to it. And he turned and went for the carrier. Which one was it? One of the carriers, because they loved the carriers. That was the thing bringing hell to their own country. And they shot him down. But after that, I said, y'all better give me a course on instruction of what our Japanese airplanes look like. So, so from then on, you really, now we spotted one. I was stood on what do we call it? Or director. We had a fellow with a like bicycle handicap with a bicycle handlebar, and he had a what we call a director. He could spot the plane in that, and he could guide it and watch it, and it would compute the amount of time, which course the plane was on, how fast it was going, so we know how fast the gun had to be outside to lead it. Well, I was up on the steps with him, and I did spot the plane. And I immediately turned and gave the order to commence firing. And it was one of the three we shot down. Another instance, we were told at the end, because the kamikazes came out of the sun and everywhere, that airplanes came back, they started orbiting as they approached the carrier. So any plane that approached, and you didn't have time to identify them, any plane that approached, not in a threatening manner, meaning wasn't orbiting, you could commence firing, shoot them down. Well, one night we had a F-4U, was a fighter plane with gull wings. The Japanese had one with gull wings. So I was in charge of 2 quadrants this particular afternoon, and this plane came in low to the water. And told them, start tracking, get ready. I could not give the words, commence firing. The good Lord would not let those words come out, and it was one of our Marine flyers who had badly damaged, and he didn't have time to. So when we pulled him out of the water, and I said, you young man, I want to, because I was younger than he was probably, I want to tell you one thing, you're one lucky SOB that I could not say commence firing at you. You tell your mother, the good Lord was looking after you too. So that stood with me a long time, because actually I could have been, if he'd have hit the ship, I'd have been court-martialed for neglect of duty or whatever else. But to this day, I don't know why I could not say commence firing. So that was an interesting thing. Another interesting thing, the destroyers, many a pilot was shot down, and the destroyers picked them up. We picked up 23 pilots. And an interesting thing, we had ice cream machine, but we didn't tell the carriers. So when we'd pick up a pilot, we would take him over to the carrier that he flew off of and return him, or highline him over. And they'd send over 20 gallons of ice cream for the crew. So we didn't tell them we had ice cream machine. But a brand new carrier came out, the Antietam, and my mother had written that somebody I knew was on the Antietam. But we picked up a pilot from them, and we sent him, took him over, and he didn't, they didn't send us any ice cream. So one of the signalmen signaled over and said, the next time we pick up a pilot and find out who's from the Antietam, we're gonna throw him back. We never were hit by a kamikaze. Now, our test group, because we stayed at general quarters, we had only one ship hit by a kamikaze. Now, there were plenty of carriers when I said the carrier Franklin was hit. The main damage was done, we had what we call radar pickets. We had ships stationed, if we were bombing Tokyo, we had 3 or 4 ships stay. One was certain plane, and the planes that were flying over Tokyo knew where that ship was. That ship stayed in a small area. I mean, the task force was moving. We couldn't afford to stay in one location. So they call them radar pickets. And we were relieved at midnight. We had radar picket one time, and we were relieved at midnight. And the next day, the ship had relieved us. Kamikaze hit them at 4 o'clock the next morning, and I saw it later. It looked like somebody taking a can open and cut all the superstructure off. Badly damaged. They had lots of casualties. The ships that turned over had lots of casualties. In fact, the one that I said turned over near us in the task force, only 2 officers got off, and I ended up knowing one of them, and the other one relieved my roommate from college when he got back to the States. They were the only 2 officers got off that ship. One time we were flying. Like I said, when we met up with the replenishment group, we were busy. We picked up about 6, 7 pilots from one of the cars, and in the meanwhile, storm came up. Hurricane, typhoon in the Pacific, not one of the 2 big ones. One big enough we had to break off doing anything else. So those pilots stayed on that ship for about 24 hours, and they said, we'll bomb Tokyo 10 times again whenever we spend one night on a destroyer in a storm. They were so seasick. I said, well, you up there, yeah, we bumping up and down and everything else. You sitting up at sailing, doesn't even know it's rough. So that was memorable. I did 2 or 3 times when we were in Leyte. 2 friends that I knew from Notre Dame saw my ship or something, and they were in there. One was on one of the American President lines, was a boat officer. So he came over, so that was a pleasant occasion to see people friends from school. By the end of the war, the Navy was in great shape. Early, I don't know what the Navy did pre-war other than shoot guns and battle the budget. They had to put plugs in the water spigots and whatnot to save money. But their communication systems between ships was terrible. All those ships we lost early down in the South Pacific around Guadalcanal was because one ship didn't know what the other ship was doing. In fact, their ship was named after the captain of the Quincy, a cruiser. That half of them were here and half of them were 30 miles away, and they heard them shooting over there, and they thought they were taking target practice at night. The Japs sunk all those and then came over and got the other half, had they combined forces. So it was a very bad situation then. But by the time we were out there, we had far superiority, guns and ships and whatnot. So there wasn't really it was more work, methodical, doing what you knew and doing it well, and we were well trained and so you got entertainment or certain things somebody said funny. One of them was we had a system for like a blinker light, but all that ships were docked. You can't imagine being in the dock, and you got 20-some, 30-some ships in a task group, and they're on automatic course change, and everybody's going where they're doing damage. But we had what we call a certain kind of a blinker that didn't show. So if you were going to send a message to a certain ship, you would call that ship on a TBS, talk between ships, and say Nancy Hanks, and they would focus whatever they had to do it. Well, Miss Nancy became a very famous girl, and they would say, well, I'm sorry, Nancy has a date in the parlor. She'll have to call back in a few minutes. And it was quite a bit of joke and be instant going on the bridge. And they had that kind of banter going back between 2 ships, making something to do with both Nancy. So that was an interesting thing. Incidentally, when the war ended, a lot of the cruisers, battleships, and destroyers went into, first of all, General MacArthur said he could not be there for 30 days. And Admiral Halsey said, we can have a Japanese force on Japan in 2 weeks. And I was one of them picked because I was supposed to have had ROTC in high school. So I don't know what I'd done if I'd have gotten there. But anyway, MacArthur found out they could get quicker. But a lot of the battleships and cruisers went in, but the carriers and the destroyers stayed out, and we sent planes over looking for prisoner of war camps and dropped supplies to them. So we didn't get into 4 or 5 days after the surrender. I don't know whether you remember, there was a television show about this bunch of, I don't know what they called it, bunch of Navy Marine flyers who were.
Black Sheep Squadron?
Huh?
Was it the Black Sheep Squadron?
Yeah, Black Sheep Squadron. And the guy's name, anyway, he was a real character and was a great pilot, but he didn't believe in the system. Well, anyway, he was shot at and captured. And we found, the word came over the radio, that he had put out with big, in Stones where this camp was, whatever his name was, whatever his name was, is here. So that was a news article for the carrier, the news people on the carrier. They maybe thought that was really funny. And after that, we got in and got to visit Tokyo and shocked at Yokohama, blocks after blocks after block of nothing but clean streets, pipes sticking up, and occasional safe. Had we burned those cities. This wasn't atomic, these were just in the B-29 at night dropping inflammatory bomb. But they were very nice, even though we saw a field at Yokosuka, the Navy base, far as I could see were human torpedoes that you got on one at night, and some human being would go drive it out and hit a suicide. So really this thing about suicide that we get in the Mideast today really was the Japanese, where they were ready to give their life for their country or whatnot. And interesting to note, and we captured Guam. I've seen newsreel, you probably haven't, of the women and children been told all these terrible things we were going to do to them when we invaded. So they went and jumped off the cliff with infants in the arms and everything else. It was awful. I've heard some Marines say that was the worst thing in the whole battle thing, to see these women and children jump off to their suicide, thinking that they would be harmed if they didn't. I had 7 ribbons, because everybody got the good conduct, and I had Atlantic because we served 3 months in Atlantic before we went over. And I don't remember what the others were. I have it written in my file at home. But I was awarded 5 battle stars to wear on those ribbons for the battles we were in within various invasions. Of course, we were fortunate, and when I say battle, we were 75 miles off, and really, I never saw a Japanese ship. I saw Japanese planes, but we were under fire often, especially earlier in my time out there. I can't tell you other than the Philippine government did give us an award after the war. We thought we should have gotten a group award for going in Tokyo Harbor like that time, late at night, that close to the war being over. But then we united the various destroyers and did try to get it within the last 3 years. But the Navy turned it down, said they weren't doing anything that post-dated that happened during World War II. There weren't awarding any commendations for that. That was the scariest thing that happened to us, I can tell you. We were practicing shore bomb. That's the first time we'd shot the big gun. Practicing shore bombardment on this desert island in the Pacific, in Hawaii somewhere. And it was a different type of shell in our main battery. Main battery, we had big guns. And the aircraft shell goes up, and it's got what they call a proximity fuse, in which it got within 500 feet, it would explode of anything and send out a lot of shrapnel and whatnot. So we would have been shore bombardment with regular ammunition. And then this plane was going to come around pulling what we call a sleeve, a target way behind it, and we would have shipped to anti-aircraft. And when they did, and they picked up the plane, they shifted the shell, and the main battery just kept on going as they tracked aim where they were going. Unfortunately, it was up in the air, which was supposed to be a stop, a mechanical device to keep it from coming, and it didn't work. So it went off, I think, within 2 foot of my ear, and knocked me clean into the pilot house, and out the other side, knocked everybody down. In the pilot house, they were much farther away than I was. So that's when I couldn't hear anything for 2 weeks. And after that, I knew, and as soon as I came back and went in business, I had a terrible time hearing on the phone. Mainly by mail, because I was engaged, and so I wrote her as often as I could. I mean, and my mother was very faithful, and she would tell me about neighbors and friends. In fact, she told me that the boy I grew up across the street from had been signed to the Alabama, battleship Alabama, and they called me last week. Anyway, and so when we came into Lithia after one of the assets of Alabama, no, he was on a tanker. The Alabama was with us. So he came out, and it got the friendly signalman to signal over to tell me that he was on this tanker to be transferred to Alabama. They went at one time, went back to the States for an overhaul. But mainly was mail. The mail was, you look forward to it. Because obviously we didn't get back till, when we get back? October of 45. The war ended in August, and it was October when we got back to San Francisco. But we did correspond, and of course my mother would tell me, and so did Madeline would tell me about what she knew and whatnot. An interesting story about that too. I had a friend, and when I came back from that last semester in Notre Dame, he met the train and said, I got it fixed, we can go in the Navy Air Corps, and they guarantee you that we will stay together all the way through training. I said, well, Bill, I can't do that. I said, I can go back to Notre Dame and get one more semester, I'll get my degree. Well, anyway, he said, oh, I'm gonna be getting all the glory firing these Navy airplanes. You're gonna be pushing a pencil on a desk. So they sent me out to the Pacific, and he fought every battle in the United States, Banner River, Florida, and ended up in Honolulu. I mean, ended up in San Francisco, Alameda. So on the way, when we got back to Pearl Harbor, he sees my ship coming in, and he's on the way out to the Philippines after the war. So he bribed Admiral's coxswain, an Admiral's barge, he called it. This thing was lace curtains, a boat, and everything else. I think he gave him a fifth of whiskey to get him to bring us out. And next thing we hear is, prepare to receive an Admiral's barge along the starboard side. Well, I didn't know I was supposed to put on a white uniform. Well, what? Here comes this Admiral. Well, I look, and climbing over the screw guard was this guy, Billy Lumpkin. He said, you won the war, and I'm on the way to win the peace. But fortunately, he had dated, in those days, and you won't remember, but the ticket office for the airlines were in hotels. And he had dated this girl, worked for one of the airlines in a hotel. So he said, I can call her or write it. When would you? And I knew my relief had come aboard. I was going to get shore duty. The State's coming up. So he said, and when we came back, the carriers were loaded with passengers. We had 100 passengers on our ship sleeping on the deck and everywhere. So you could not get out of San Francisco. You could not get any way transportation. So they dated my orders 10 days from when I departed. Said, now if you don't get out by now, by then we'll redate them. Well, fortunately, he wrote her and told her I was coming. And she got me a ticket on a commercial airline going to Washington, saying I was Frank Stumpf of Bank of America. So And I don't when I'd have gotten home otherwise. So anyway, we left at 9 o'clock at night, and I got to Washington 5 o'clock the next afternoon. But I was home. But that was a very interesting trip. And the fellow I told you was on the Alabama. This is funny. He was disciplined or something and didn't get off the ship in Pearl Harbor, so we didn't see him. So anyway, he comes ashore there in San Francisco finally, and he spots this cute girl, and he starts a conversation about tickets to Richmond. And she said, "Oh, you from Richmond?" He said, "Yeah." She said, "Do you know Billy Lumpkin?" He said, "No." Said, "Do you know Frank Stumpf?" She said, "Name 4 people." He said, "Darn, I'm 3,000 miles from home trying to pick up a girl. She knows everybody in my hometown." So there was some humor. But basically, mail was the way we stayed in touch with.
And did you get mail frequently, or once a week, once a month?
I would say once a month. Usually we got it when we came in. At the end, when we didn't come in for 90 days to a port, with tankers would bring the mail to us and whatnot. But it could be late, and you could get, sometimes one thing was 2 months. You got something a month after something had been mailed, but after you mailed. But Christmas present came through and things like that. When we came back, my shore duty turned out to be Norfolk, Virginia, which I said Norfolk or Washington requested. But I thought, man, this is great. I'm engaged. We're going to be 30 miles, 60 miles away. And then I go down there and said, "You're supply officer's fleet boat pool number so-and-so." I said, "What in the world is a fleet boat pool?" Well, the Army, the Navy still had forgotten what happened in Pearl Harbor. So it used to be, before the war, when the fleet was in, all the ships on the East Coast came to Norfolk or went to New York. Of course, they're ready targets. But so they would all come together, and these boat pools would go and service them, carry supplies to them, carrying personnel, shore, and all that. Well, so they said, then we said, "We're going to move you to the PT base up in Melville, Rhode Island." I said, "Well, that goes my close to home duty." So I got up there, and by that time we realized the system, what they'd set up, wasn't working. So we took over the old PT base, and we were repairing the boat. So the commanding officer said, "Well, you're the senior supply officer in this group. You're the supply officer for this base." I said, "Well, my orders read supply officer for small boats, whatever." So anyway, I became the supply officer of the base, and that wasn't bad because I got married that January, and we did do a good job of fixing these boats up, and and these were the same boats that are amphibious ship when we were, because the war was over, but where you would invade, these were the wide open metal boats that went over there. So we had to fix them up and keep them at the PT base. There was two or three old PT boats there. I was amazed. But we were married, so I get off every 3 out of 4 nights, and we had an apartment in, that's another interesting thing, apartment in Newport, which was 20 miles away. And so my wife went to rent the apartment. She went to my new wife, went to the real estate agent, and this was, oh no, this was later. But anyway, and told us about this apartment and all, but he also said that one of the Astors, the John Jacob Astor relatives, cousins, was dying of cancer, and she craved butter. And of course, the butter was still rationed. So my wife did go to the commissary and buy butter for John Jacob Astor's distant relative who was dying for cancer. But that was interesting because it was the society from New York that spring was still coming back. So anyway, I knew when my points were up, she went home early because her brother was graduating from high school. and I wanted to go to the hospital instead of just going to Norfolk and getting, hey, you're healthy, let me look at your tongue, you're okay, you're out. I wanted to go on record about this, so I went to the Boston hospital. And I remember an interesting thing. I was sitting that night, well, anyway, they said the same thing, you're deaf, but in a quiet room with no distractions, you can hear fine. But my problem was when there were other distractions, it was more discerning. It was very hard for me to hear high notes. So discerning noises, and of course the telephone was terrible. So, but anyway, I got to go on. But there's a funny incident. That night I was at the offices in the bar where the BO bachelor officers' quarters was, waiting to go home the next day. And this fellow was sitting next to me, and I saw he was a lieutenant commander in the chaplain corps. And it was Friday night, and we as Catholics, military didn't have the band not eating meat on Friday. So he and I were ordering a steak, and he turned out to be a Catholic priest and lived in Boston. He said, I normally go home with my mother, but she wouldn't serve me the steak on Friday. And so I said, well, we exempt. He said, well, she don't buy exemptions. She said, you don't eat meat on Friday in my household. So I thought that was right. But anyway, I flew home, went up down the coast, and yes, I remember, we had room in my house where we moved in, and my daddy said, well, this was June, and he said, well, I've gotten a brand new apartment for you in September. And I said, what do you mean? Well, you couldn't get a house anyway. I mean, we didn't build in the house, and now all these people coming home from the military had money enough to make a down, could buy under the GI. So both of them had to get a room. So we ended up in a brand new, everybody that furnished building materials for this apartment got to, to get the chance to have an apartment in there. And it's within walking distance almost to where I'm living now. So I call it the old folks home. We're in a very, very nice total care place in Richmond. But anyway, I do remember coming home very much, how happy I was, and didn't put long for my father to put me to work, I can tell you that now. So I went over and became the accountant for the company and assistant manager and assistant production manager. I had a shipping clerk. I had more jobs than do. So my wife went to the doctor. The doctor charged what the traffic would bear. So she said, I didn't know what to tell him. He asked what your occupation was. I said, why don't you tell him shipping clerk? She said, shipping clerk? I said, yeah, you tell a banker when I'm borrowing money, I'm vice president, but you tell them I'm a shipping clerk, so they won't charge as much. So, Melvin Ladd was the only one, particularly now. I've been very close to one of the officers. Ship later on, 20-some years later, we had a reunion, and I had the privilege of rounding up all the officers where they were, and I had a ball, I can tell you. I called one guy, and I said, is this Mr. So-and-so Ray Lander? He said, yes, it is. It was in New Mexico, of all places. I said, well, we're doing an audit in the Navy Department, and we found out you were overpaid. He said, oh, my Lord, how much do I owe you? And so then my storekeeper had smuggled a fifth of whiskey aboard in Boston, last port before we left the country. Well, when we took on beer in Hawaii, one case of beer disappeared between the time we got it on deck and it got to the storeroom. So the captain held a captain's inspection. And my safe where I kept the money was the only combination the captain didn't have. So the top storekeeper came and said, Mr. Stumpf, I said, what? He said, we got a problem. I said, what's that? He said, Prope smuggled a bottle of whiskey aboard, and now the captain, no way you can hide it, and the captain's getting ready to do. I said, bring it up here and I'll put it in my safe. So anyway, I called him, and I finally said, is this so-and-so Prope? He was from St. Louis. And my younger David, you met him, was lived in St. Louis and was living there. Served on the Samuel N. Moore. Yes, sir, I was. I said, do you remember what you, I said, this is a naval inspection. We're going over old record. Do you remember what you smuggled on board that ship? He said, I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. I said, you smuggled illegally a bottle of whiskey on board, didn't you? He said, who in the hell is this? Anyway, I did meet one of the officers who was a communication, stood my coding watch. He was responsible for the code. Another one of our storekeepers, a radioman, who had the same watch I did. I'd spend time there waiting for the next message. And he was from the same town as Frank Sinatra. So he would tell me all about Frank Sinatra, had to sing for his supper and all that, but I haven't seen him since. But no, the only one was this Melvin lad that I really kept in touch with. It wasn't like you were with somebody every day in the trenches, you know, marching, the Army, or the Marines. They were much more likely that than anybody else. There's an organization that you might be interested in called the Military Order of the Carabao. Now this goes way back to the days of what they call the insurrection, when the Americans went in after the Spanish-American War and took over the Philippines. That was a group, a revolutionary moment among the Philadelphia people. But it was made in jest, these people all sitting around the officers' club, joking about the Philippines, and but mainly the Carabao, which was a beast of burden, pulled a wagon, they ate him, everything else. And they wrote all these songs. It started this organization. If you served in a war, on or around, and of course, MacArthur was president of it, and once a year, they put on an annual meeting. It used to be at the Waldorf, not the Waldorf, whatever the big hotel in Washington, and now they over the gigantic hotel. But people joined, and of course, all the military people who supply the military with equipment today and all. I mean, 1,500 people come to the best party I've ever seen. The Marine band comes, and they spoof everybody in the government except the president. They never spoof the president, but it's a Southern senator, and I remember when we split a Navy submarine contract for half of it to be Connecticut and half of it being to the tune of T for two, it was contract for two. But they still do it, still put on all kind of big things. That's when I ran into my second captain. He was an admiral at the time. So I haven't been up there in 4 or 5 years because I'm too old for pub, but they put on one heck of a party and show with the Marine band. But that, I think, is an instant people know such an, and they meet once a month in Washington, because so many of the military are still up there. But I guess now there's no war in the Philippines for so long, since Korea or Vietnam, I guess. But anyway, that's it. I thought the Navy did a my naval service was a gift. The Navy gave me far more responsibility than I could have gotten in 20 years of working. I mean, they didn't say, you don't qualify, do it. So I came in and said, the Navy owes me, people talk about the Army owes them this, so I don't think the Navy or the military owed me anything. They took some guy that didn't know anything and paid me, taught me responsibility and systems, had to work, everything. I think it had a tremendous responsibility benefit for me to have gone through all I went through on that ship. And I'm very grateful that I came home with all my arms and legs and everything. But I think I was very fortunate, and I do appreciate my service in the Navy. In fact, I made a dumb thing. I stayed in the active reserve. And I was on the battalion staff, I was a supply officer, and of course they told us the active reserve will, in case of an emergency, you'll be called to service here, and you'll bring the inactive reserve in and send them off. Well, that didn't happen. My wife finally said, we got a baby, and I can't stand this, you going out one night a week. So I got out, and that was 3 months before Korea, and everybody in that staff went but me and one the doctor because he left to go into specialized training. And everybody went overseas, and I said, I don't know what my father would have done. And I've been stupid enough to got sent off in the Navy at that time. And he was way up in age, and with that brick plant and all, and we owed money, we built a brand new one. So I just felt the Navy though, and I'm still active in the Navy League, and I've been on guest of the Navy cruises 3 or 4 times in my past, and gotten to know a lot, and still respect the U.S. Navy very much. They were all news releases. Somebody ought to have them. They came out of San Francisco every night on the radio. We got them at midnight, but it couldn't have been because it's 12 hours difference in time, I guess, for the most part. It was a newspaper, about 3 pages, of what was going on in the States.
Yeah.
So we didn't know what was going on in the States.